14. The Hamburglar. In November of 2017, police in Howard County, Maryland, shared surveillance footage of a woman breaking into a McDonald's in Columbia through a drive-thru window. They wanted help identifying the suspect, who was captured on video as she tried placing an order at 1 a.m., only to discover that the restaurant was closed. Determined to get what she came for, she forced her way inside and helped herself to a drink, food, Happy Meal, toys, $1,400 from the cash register, and an employee's purse. A McDonald's worker called the police after arriving at 5 a.m. and noticed that several things had been disturbed. The intruder had spent 35 minutes hanging out in the restaurant, during which time she attempted to disarm the security system. She was also seen trying to wipe her fingerprints off anything she touched, including the cash drawer. A $500 reward was offered for information about the woman's identity, but police were unsure of how to split it up after being bombarded with tips in response to the video. Thanks to the information they received, investigators were able to identify the suspect as Jessica Mary Cross. She turned herself in and ultimately pleaded guilty to second-degree burglary, which earned her a 5-year prison sentence, with all but 90 days suspended. 13. Small woman, huge tantrum. In October 2020, Indianapolis police released surveillance footage of a petite young woman with bright pink hair throwing a colossal tantrum inside a local McDonald's restaurant. The suspect was wanted on a battery charge in connection with the incident, which had occurred 2 months prior. Law enforcement hoped members of the public could help them identify her. Footage of the tirade showed the suspect slapping an employee, jumping over the counter to fight a worker, and throwing anything she could get her hands on, including 2 wet floor caution signs, a garbage can, order placeholders, and a promotional sign. At one point, a retired member of law enforcement attempted to intervene, but the violent outburst continued. By the time police arrived, the suspect had fled the scene. Workers told responding officers that the woman was angry about her drive-thru order being incorrect, and an employee required treatment at a hospital for a head laceration from being struck with one of the many items the woman threw. At the time the story was published, police had identified the owner of the vehicle the woman visited the restaurant in, but they said that the person was refusing to cooperate with the investigation. A reward of up to $1,000 was offered for information, but it's unclear whether the suspect was ever caught. 12. Epic brawl in Sin City. In a violent confrontation that was captured on camera at a Las Vegas McDonald's in July of 2018, a customer named Sabrina Fontalar was seen berating a worker, challenging her to a fight, and throwing things at her. The young woman could be heard calling 24-year-old Erica Shavola fat, a hoe, and other rude names while spewing insults left and right. Shavola charged out from behind the counter, narrowly avoiding a flying milkshake and ignoring a tray that struck her in the head. She immediately began beating Fontalar relentlessly, pinning her to the counter and striking her repeatedly with a closed fist while bystanders tried to break up the fight. Shavola eventually threw Fontalar over a table, and the altercation ended after Fontalar picked up a chair but thought twice about the decision to throw it. The viral clip was first posted by Nevada resident Mary Dayag, who said that the altercation began when Fontalar allegedly tried filling a free water cup with soda. Fontalar later bragged on social media about being the customer in the video and claimed that she'd been charged with battery. Shavola was happy to confirm that she didn't lose her job over the incident, although McDonald's made it clear in a statement that the company doesn't condone her behavior. In a social media post, she wrote that she held off on hitting Fontalar, pointing out that she listened to a lot of smack talk before she got physical. Erica's mother, 48-year-old Anna Shavola, told the Daily Mail that her daughter has always dealt with people giving her problems over her size. Anna accused Fontalar of looking for a fight, but was angrier at Mary Dayag for recording and posting the video. She was even considering hiring a lawyer and pursuing legal action against Diag, but it's unclear whether that ended up happening. When approached by the news outlet at her home and asked to talk, Erica declined, saying that her mom was mad and didn't want her speaking to the press. For someone who came across as rough and tough during the epic beatdown, she seemed surprisingly shy during ordinary conversation. Fontelaire also apparently got tired of discussing the incident and declined to comment any further. 11. The murder of Joshua Goodman. While responding to a call at a McDonald's restaurant in San Diego late one morning in September of 2023, police found 44-year-old Joshua Goodman lying in the parking lot, close to death. He'd been stabbed in broad daylight. Efforts to save Goodman's life were unfortunately futile, and he died at a nearby hospital later that day. The suspected killer, later identified as 31-year-old Armando Paris, had fled the scene before emergency responders arrived. According to police, Goodman was already in the parking lot when Paris arrived in a minivan. Paris allegedly exited the vehicle from the passenger side and immediately began chasing Goodman in circles and stabbing him with what appeared to be a knife, while a female suspect drove the minivan around the parking lot with the sliding door open. Then, after finishing whatever he came to do, Paris jumped into the van and the vehicle sped off. From start to finish, the entire interaction took less than 30 seconds. Police believe that Paris and Goodman knew each other, but they're unsure of the nature of their relationship or what led to the deadly events that transpired that day. According to law enforcement, the suspects appeared to follow Goodman into the McDonald's parking lot. More than 2 weeks after Goodman's death, Paris was arrested at a motel in West Covina on an unrelated matter. When police ran his name, they discovered that he was wanted for murder and took him into custody. He's currently being held without bail as he awaits a preliminary hearing scheduled for February 7, 2024. In the meantime, investigators are still working to identify the getaway driver and have appealed to the public for information that could help lead to their capture. 10. Zhao Yuan McDonald's cult murder. Also known as Eastern Lighting, the Church of the Almighty God is considered China's most dangerous cult. Based on the belief that Jesus Christ has returned to Earth and is a living Chinese woman, the group has an estimated 3 to 4 million members in several nations, including China, despite being formerly banned in the country since 1995. In May 2014, 6 suspected members of the cult entered a McDonald's restaurant in the city of Shaoyuan. They introduced themselves as missionaries, persuaded those in the restaurant to convert to their faith, and then ordered everyone to hand over their cell phones to exchange information for future contact. A 35-year-old woman named Wu Shuoyan refused and was fatally beaten by 2 of the missionaries, who struck her with mops that they had entered the restaurant with, threw a chair at her, and stomped on her head and face. Disturbing footage of the attack that was circulated on social media showed the suspects warning bystanders that they'd die if they tried to interfere. And as they beat and bludgeoned Wu to death, they called her an evil spirit and shouted at her to go die. All 6 suspects were arrested at the scene. They were all members of an extended family called the Zhangs. The family's patriarch Zhang Lidong and his daughter Zhang Fan were identified as the 2 individuals who killed Wu. Zhang Lidong proudly admitted to the murder in a jailhouse interview, stating, "I beat her with all my might and stamped on her too. She was a demon. We had to destroy her." Journalists would later point out that the clan had a previous association with the Church of Almighty God, but by the time Wu was murdered, they appeared to have outgrown the cult and branched off into a separate ideology of their own. Their split from the other groups seemed to coincide with the development of their belief that 2 of the women in the group were divine incarnations. In October 2014, Zhang Lidong and Zhang Fan were found guilty and sentenced to death. They were executed less than a year after the attack in February 2015. 3 out of the 4 other suspects received prison sentences of 7 years, 10 years, and life for their roles in the crime. And in 2017, Chinese officials announced that 2 out of the 3 convicted group members who are serving prison time have been deprogrammed from their cult mindset. While they practiced their own belief system, they blamed the Church of the Almighty God for influencing them during their brainwashed period. 9. Fatal far overreaction. In what police are describing as a far overreaction, a 35-year-old McDonald's employee named Sam Antoine Ivy is facing a second-degree murder charge after intervening in an argument between 2 women at the restaurant where he worked in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Ivy was working on a Monday morning in October 2023 when the women took their disagreement from a nearby bus stop into the restaurant. One of the parties was apparently trying to get away from the other, only to be followed inside where the fighting continued. A manager separated the women and sent one of them out of the restaurant. Later identified as 30-year-old Jacqueline Mary Reed, she returned a short while later and the disturbance resumed. Reed reportedly reached out and touched Ivy during the incident, prompting him to pull a concealed handgun and shoot her in the chest. Ivy fled the scene in his vehicle, and Reed died from her injuries. In addition to second-degree murder, Ivy faces charges of possession of a firearm by a felon, possession of a weapon of mass destruction, and bringing a gun onto educational property. His bail was set at $150,000. Speaking with local station WYFF4, Hendersonville Police Chief Blair Myhand said that Ivy stepped in when he shouldn't have, and described the shooting as a far overreaction to the situation that was occurring at the time. He was apprehended at a nearby school after a resource officer recognized him as a student's father. Records obtained by ABC 13 News revealed that 911 callers tried getting help for Jacqueline in the days leading up to her death due to her unusual behavior. 3 days before the shooting, a 911 caller described the young woman as looking zombified, while another described seeing Jacqueline walking around in circles in a seemingly disoriented state. 2 days later, a caller told dispatchers that when they tried to check on Jacqueline, she told them to go away. And during a 7th call later that evening, the person making the report urged the dispatcher to send a first responder. The dispatcher informed the caller that they had sent someone to offer help to the woman several times over the past few days, but that they couldn't force her to accept help if she didn't want it. Just hours before the shooting, a caller reported seeing Jacqueline standing in the middle of the road and trying to get into a car. In the minutes leading up to the fatal incident, multiple callers told dispatchers that she was attacking people, including the woman who ran into the McDonald's restaurant in an attempt to get away from her. Jacqueline was from Johnson City, Tennessee, and it's unclear how or why she ended up in Hendersonville in the days leading up to her death. In a statement, Chief Myhan urged the public to remember that the young woman was a victim who was unjustly shot by someone who was illegally carrying a gun, and that she didn't die as the result of her homelessness or need for medical help. 8. McDonald's Massacre. 41-year-old James Huberty lived just a half a block away from a McDonald's restaurant in San Diego's San Isidro neighborhood. On an otherwise uneventful summer day in 1984, he approached his wife in their bedroom and told her he was kissing her goodbye. When she asked Huberty where he was going, he replied that he was going hunting for humans. He grabbed 3 guns, including an Uzi, along with hundreds of rounds of ammunition, left his apartment, and drove to the nearby McDonald's. For reasons that nobody will ever know, Huberty entered the restaurant and began shooting, and he ordered everyone to get down on the ground. He threatened to kill people if they didn't comply, but killed them anyway when they did. One man tried persuading him not to kill anyone else, and Huberty reacted by shooting him 14 times. Throughout the massacre, he repeatedly insulted the people he was shooting at and yelled about fighting in the Vietnam War, despite never having served in the military. While responding to the scene, police quickly realized that they would not be able to take a conventional approach to apprehending Huberty, without all or most of them being shot. SWAT sniper Charles Foster stationed himself on the roof of a nearby post office and waited for his opportunity to take Huberty out. Then, finally, more than an hour after the carnage began, Huberty stepped in front of a drive-thru window, giving Foster a chance to end the horrific violence. By then, Huberty had killed 21 people and injured 20 others, and one of the wounded individuals would die by the next day, making it the deadliest shooting in California history. Police also recovered over 250 shell casings at the scene. Just days earlier, Huberty had told his wife Edna that he believed he was mentally ill. He'd also recently lost his job as a security guard. Huberty contacted a local clinic on the day before the massacre and was promised a call back soon. But because he didn't appear to be in a crisis, the person who took his intake request marked the case as non-urgent. And when the clinic failed to call the next day, Huberty made a comment to the effect of, "Well, society had their chance." Edna didn't realize what he meant. In hindsight, it seems like the signs were there. Huberty was known as a doomsday planner and a survivalist who bought into conspiracy theories. His runaway paranoia eventually led him to believe that Ronald Reagan and the US government were conspiring against him. He also predicted an escalation of the Cold War, the imminent breakdown of American society, and other apocalyptic scenarios, including nuclear war and economic collapse. In addition to his apparent certainty that the world was going to end, Huberty was an inherently unhappy person who struggled financially. Losing his job and being unable to support his family only seemed to exacerbate the chip on his shoulder towards society, and he eventually snapped. The McDonald's restaurant was quickly remodeled following the massacre, but it was ultimately decided that it would be more appropriate to demolish it entirely. And after its destruction, a permanent memorial was put in its place. 7. Deadly drive-thru disagreement. 22-year-old Imaine McRae and a friend were listening to music in the McDonald's drive-thru at 2 a.m. one day in January 2021 when a man pulled up behind them and complained about the noise. Later identified as 23-year-old Jesus Medrano, he could be seen arguing with the women on surveillance footage. During the confrontation, he appeared to ram his car into their vehicle, then exited his car and assessed the damage to his front bumper. The argument continued, and the footage showed Medrano briefly running back to his car before approaching the women's vehicle and knocking on the passenger side mirror. He suddenly began backing away with his hands in the air. The person in the passenger seat, later identified as McRae, had pulled a gun and pointed it at Medrano. She shot the young man, who collapsed in the parking lot and eventually died from his injuries. McRae and her friend fled the scene, but the young woman later turned herself in to the police. She claimed that Medrano acted like he was putting a gun in his waistband when she decided to shoot him. Authorities initially charged McRae with murder, which was later reduced to a voluntary manslaughter charge. She opted for a bench trial, which is when the judge decides a defendant's fate rather than a jury, and was found not guilty. Following the ruling, prosecutors declined to pursue an attempted murder charge that McRae was also facing, and the case was dismissed. 6. The disappearance of Justin Henry. A family was left shattered in October of 2023 when 34-year-old Justin Henry vanished into thin air. He was last seen in person at his partner's home in London's Brixton district on the evening of October 15th. And he was last seen on surveillance video buying a value meal at a McDonald's drive-thru in Croydon, South London later that night. Nothing appeared to be amiss in the footage, which was captured shortly before 10 p.m. and showed the young man retrieving the meal in his Mercedes sedan. Justin's loved ones reported him missing the next day after failing to hear from him, and they were disappointed to learn that his trail went cold after stopping at the McDonald's restaurant. The family said that it was totally out of character for him to drop off the radar without warning. Law enforcement released the McDonald's footage in hopes that someone remembered seeing Justin there and had an idea of where he went after that. Investigators said that they believe Justin drove to a location nearby and stayed there for 2.5 hours, and his vehicle was later found abandoned a half-hour away. Police were unable to identify the driver in surveillance footage of the car that was captured at around 1 a.m. on the night of Justin's disappearance. But his family insisted that he was not the person behind the wheel. Several weeks later, in early November, a body believed to be Justin was found in the trunk of a red Nissan near Croydon. While announcing the discovery, police also revealed that they'd arrested 3 suspects in connection with the case, including a 27-year-old woman who was charged with kidnapping and 2 men aged 28 and 29 who are facing murder charges. No cause of death has been announced, and officials have yet to tell the public whether the identity of the body has been confirmed. For now, it remains unclear what happened to Justin after he stopped at McDonald's. But unfortunately, it seems as though something went very wrong shortly after he left the restaurant. 5. Cold fries lead to cold-blooded murder. 23-year-old Matthew Webb was working at a McDonald's restaurant in Brooklyn's Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood in August 2022 when a disgruntled customer complained about her fries being cold. Later identified as Lisa Fulmore, the woman asked to speak to a manager, only to allegedly be laughed at by the employees. At the time, Lisa was on a video call with her 20-year-old son, Michael Morgan. He didn't like how his mother was being treated and made a beeline for the restaurant, where he got into a fist fight with Webb. The altercation spilled outside the restaurant and into the sidewalk, where Morgan allegedly punched Webb in the face, then pulled a gun and shot him in the neck. Webb was rushed to the hospital, where he was pronounced brain dead despite doctors' best efforts to save him. His family was faced with a heart-wrenching decision to take him off life support, knowing he'd never wake up but desperately wishing otherwise. In the meantime, authorities charged Morgan with attempted murder, which was upgraded to a murder charge after Webb passed away. According to police, Morgan tried disposing of evidence after the crime, including the clothing he was wearing when he shot Webb. The young man's girlfriend, 18-year-old Camelia Dunlap, was arrested on a weapon possession charge for allegedly handing Morgan the gun that was used in the murder and running off with it afterward. In the aftermath of the unspeakable tragedy, Morgan's mother told police that her son got to do what he got to do. While being questioned about the McDonald's shooting, Morgan reportedly confessed to another murder that had occurred back in 2020. He'd long been a suspect in the crime, which took place just a handful of blocks away from the McDonald's restaurant. The victim, 28-year-old Kevin Holloman, was gunned down in front of an apartment building and died from multiple gunshot wounds. Even before the 2 murders he now stands accused of, Morgan had a lengthy rap sheet, according to a police source who told the New York Daily News that law enforcement had long been eager to get him off the street because he's considered highly dangerous. Records show that he's being held in custody while awaiting the outcomes of his pending cases. Sadly, though, nobody wins in a situation like this, which has resulted in 2 young lives being taken far too soon and another being ruined as the result of an impulsive young person's reckless decision to use a deadly weapon. 4. Drive-thru drama spirals out of control. Yvette Benavides was napping in the passenger seat of her friend Victor Torres's car one afternoon in early 2023 when she awoke to him and another man arguing loudly in a McDonald's drive-thru in Albuquerque. She later told police that the stranger, later identified as 24-year-old DeAndre Vigil, had pulled up beside them in his vehicle and threatened them. And at one point, she thought Vigil was reaching for a gun in his car. Fearing they were in life-threatening danger, Yvette told Victor to hit the gas and leave the parking lot. Victor took the advice, but DeAndre allegedly chased after their vehicle. At some point during the ordeal, Victor parked his car, approached DeAndre's vehicle on foot, and asked him why he was following them. He told DeAndre to stop, but according to Yvette, DeAndre responded by saying, "Come over here, big boy. I got something for you." As Victor tried once again to ask DeAndre why he was following them, multiple gunshots rang out. The exact scenario that Yvette had feared the most was happening. Victor was then fatally struck by the bullets, bringing his life to an abrupt end at just 39 years old, and the suspect fled the scene. Police identified DeAndre Vigil as the suspect based on eyewitness accounts and surveillance footage. At the time, he was wanted on a robbery warrant in a separate case, and he was also suspected of being involved in another case in which a victim was shot multiple times. Authorities haven't said whether Vigil and Torres had any prior connections leading up to the deadly confrontation, but based on the version of events relayed by Yvette Benavidez, it sounds like the men were strangers who got into a petty disagreement that spiraled way out of control. Vigil was charged with open murder and shooting at or from a motor vehicle. He also faces multiple charges in connection with unrelated cases, including aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and armed robbery. For now, though, he remains held without bail while awaiting trial. 3. Sydney River McDonald's murders. 18-year-old Derek Wood and two of his friends spent months planning to rob the safe at the McDonald's restaurant he worked at in Sydney River, Nova Scotia. So, during his shift on May 7, 1992, he snuck into the basement and propped the door slightly open with his backpack. And after the restaurant was closed, he returned with his accomplices, 23-year-old Freeman Daniel McNeil and 18-year-old Darren Muse. The trio entered through the basement and proceeded to beat, stab, and fatally shoot 3 employees, including the manager, 22-year-old law student Donna Warren, 27-year-old janitor James Jimmy Fagan, who was just arriving for his 1 a.m. shift when he was killed, and 29-year-old maintenance worker Neil Burrows Jr. A 4th employee, 20-year-old Arlene McNeil, survived being shot in the head, but was severely disabled and spent the rest of her life in an assisted living facility. She then passed away in 2018 at the age of 46. Wood thought that the safe contained around $200,000, but the murderous thieves only made off with a little over $2,000. Investigators soon identified Wood, Muse, and McNeil as the suspects and arrested them in connection with the crime. Darren Muse admitted to stabbing one of the victims in the neck and throat and pleaded guilty to his role in the murders. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. The parole granted Muse full parole in 2012, noting that he demonstrated an understanding of the wrongfulness of his behavior and had taken advantage of the prison's anger management and therapy programs. Freeman McNeil and Daniel Wood were both convicted of murder, robbery, and forcible confinement, and were each sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years. Wood was denied parole in 2022, with the board noting that he hadn't taken advantage of any rehabilitative programs during his time in prison. He also refused to participate in the parole hearing and has been convicted of several other violent crimes over the years, including stabbing a fellow inmate and assaulting 2 corrections officers. And while the McDonald's murders marked his first criminal conviction, he's suspected of carrying out a series of unsolved robberies and burglaries prior to the killings. McNeil was granted day parole in December 2022, despite failing to participate in any meaningful periods of counseling, with the parole board noting that a psychologist assessed his likelihood of reoffending at low to moderate. 2. The murder of Alfonso Solomon. 19-year-old Alfonso Solomon was waiting in line at a McDonald's drive-thru in Groves, Texas, late one night in April of 2022, when 2 other young men pulled up in a separate vehicle. Surveillance footage showed one of the men, later identified as Darionte Calvin Everfield, entering the restaurant while his friend, Daryl Dwayne Prevost, waited in the vehicle. He exited a few minutes later, walked over to Solomon's car and stared at him. According to police, Solomon and the suspects knew each other and had a history of being on bad terms. In the video, Solomon could be seen exiting his vehicle and arguing with Everfield. Then, just moments later, Prevost allegedly began shooting at Solomon, who tried to run away and collapsed in the parking lot. By the time officers arrived, the suspects had fled the scene. Police found Solomon lying face down in the parking lot and were unable to save his life despite their best efforts. Employees were able to identify Everfield as one of the suspects, and detectives began working to track him down. They spoke with his grandmother, who identified the owner of the vehicle Everfield was driving that night as a woman named LaChastity Johnson. And during a conversation with police, Johnson reportedly said that Everfield's grandmother had called her and told her that her vehicle had been involved in a shooting. She described Everfield and Prevost as nervous and frantic when they arrived at her house later that night. Johnson further claimed that Prevost had made a comment about how Solomon shouldn't have threatened to kill him and Everfield while reaching for something. Both men were arrested on suspicion of murder. In December 2023, a jury found Prevost guilty of murder and sentenced him to 76 years in prison. Everfield will go to trial in the future, although it's unclear when the proceedings are scheduled to begin. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Taiwan McDonald's bombings. On the afternoon of April 28, 1992, a bomb exploded in the men's bathroom of a McDonald's restaurant in Taipei. A bomb squad had been called to the scene following the discovery of the device and was attempting to either remove or defuse it when the explosion occurred, killing a member of the squad. Another bomb exploded later that day inside a telephone booth next to a McDonald's in the southern city of Kaohsiung, just 30 minutes after police had searched the restaurant, injuring 3 employees. Both devices were activated by mercury tilt switches, which are triggered by a jerk or sudden movement. That same evening, a letter demanding $240,000 and threatening to detonate 6 bombs was found inside a soda cup outside a McDonald's in Taipei. It also contained instructions on how to defuse the bombs. The company closed all 57 of the franchise's locations throughout Taiwan while law enforcement worked to get the situation under control. Altogether, 4 undetonated bombs were safely removed from McDonald's restaurants, and 1 more exploded in a men's room in the Taipei suburb of Yanghe as the manager examined it. The manager was critically injured, while a handful of other employees and customers sustained less serious injuries. Taiwan McDonald's Corporation Chairman David Sun vowed to keep the restaurants closed until they were deemed 100% safe again. He also refused to fulfill the extortion demand, stating that he believed the company had a responsibility not to concede to this kind of request. Sun did, however, offer a $480,000 reward for assistance in capturing the people involved in the extortion plot, and the reward was eventually increased to $880,000. Restaurants began ripening several days later with heightened security measures, including guards, metal detectors, and CCTV cameras. A few weeks after the bombings, authorities charged a plumber named Chen Si-xie and a second suspect, Pan Che-ming, with murder and extortion. Prosecutors intended to seek the death penalty for both defendants, but the judge overseeing the case concluded that the men were after money and had no intention to kill. Chen was convicted of both charges and sentenced to life in prison. Pan was found guilty of providing the explosives that were used in the bombs and harboring Chen after the bombings, and received a 15-year prison sentence.
10. Choked on pancakes. A college in Connecticut recently settled a lawsuit after one of their students died during a dramatic pancake eating contest back in 2017. I'm talking about Sacred Heart University in Fairfield. This college has agreed to undisclosed terms with Caitlin Nelson's mother. Naturally, Caitlin's mother was furious with the college after her 20-year-old daughter died just 3 days following the eating contest. She filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the college, though we don't know exactly how much money they gave her. The court proceedings are over, but no one is spilling the beans on how much Caitlin's premature death cost the college. But let's go back to the eating contest. The idea was dreamed up by a sorority with the intent of benefiting a group called Prevent Child Abuse America. In other words, it was supposed to be an eating contest for charity. And pancakes seemed like the perfect food. Seems innocent enough, right? Caitlin herself was a social work major, with her father being one of the police officers that died during the September 11th attacks in Manhattan. The family had already been through a lot, and nobody expected Caitlin to die eating hotcakes. Just a few minutes into the competition, Caitlin started choking. A pair of nursing students tried to save her life with first aid, and it seemed to work at first. Paramedics quickly arrived, and Caitlin was taken to the hospital, where she had to be transferred to another hospital. It was at the second hospital where she died, all because a thick piece of pancake got stuck in her throat, and she couldn't get the darn thing out. 9. Taco mayhem. 41-year-old Dana Hutchings viewed himself as an eating champion. Specifically, Dana loved tacos. Who doesn't? So when he was at a minor league baseball game at Chukchansi Park in Fresno, California, he eagerly signed up for the taco eating contest. The contest was being held in honor of the game between the Fresno Grizzlies and the Memphis Redbirds, but it would be the last minor league game that Dana ever witnessed. While stuffing tacos into his face as quickly and as voraciously as possible, he started to choke. He choked so hard that he needed medical assistance. According to Officer Tony Botti, who was present at the time of the disaster, Dana made it to the hospital where medical staff had to literally pull food out of his airway. But all their attempts failed. Dana had no way to breathe, and he died there on the table. This is an unfortunate side effect of eating contests. If you don't know what you're doing, sometimes you can choke on your food. Dana's 18-year-old son is now trying to sue the event organizers for negligence. The son claims that his father was never warned of the risks involved with the eating contest, and that it's all their fault that he's dead. The kid is now seeking monetary damages against Fresno Sports and Event LLC. 8. Eating cockroaches. In Florida, an eating contest from hell resulted in one death. The death has experts puzzled, while the very existence of the eating contest has the rest of the world wanting to be sick. This was the Midnight Madness bug eating competition, held at Ben Siegel Reptiles, about 40 miles, 64 kilometers from Miami. The main course, cockroaches. Yes, it was a creepy crawly eating competition, including 2 different types of worms and cockroaches. Edward Archbold signed up for the competition, thinking it would be both fun and gross. Archbold ate at least 60 grams of mealworms, 35 superworms, which, by the way, are about 3 inches, 7.6 centimeters long each, and most of a bucket of raw roaches. The prize to the winner of the competition was a free python from the Reptile Emporium. Eat a couple of bugs, get a free snake. This is not where most people are spending their Friday nights. Amazingly, Edward Archbold won the competition. He ate the most bugs and slurped up the most worms. But according to the Broward County Sheriff's Office, Edward then got violently ill. He collapsed out on the street in front of the store, started vomiting all over himself, and then was dragged to the hospital. By the time doctors got to look at him, he was already dead. The big question now is, how did Edward die? He didn't choke on anything, but instead got so sick that he literally puked his guts out. The best theory right now is that Edward simply ate way too many cockroaches, hitting his tolerance level for the allergens shed by roaches. Eating one or two roaches wouldn't cause a reaction to their allergens, but eating a whole bucket of them probably caused Edward to go into anaphylactic shock. 7. Cake seizure. In Australia, the country was celebrating its birthday. And what better way to celebrate Australia Day than with a cake-eating competition? The contest was put together at the Beach House Hotel in Queensland, as they actually have a Lamington eating contest every single year for Australia Day. But this time, tragedy struck when a 60-year-old woman stuffed too many of these little cakes into her mouth and started flopping around on the floor from a seizure. For those who aren't familiar with Lamingtons, they're Australian cakes made from pieces of butter cake or sponge cake, with a delicious outer layer of chocolate sauce, and the whole thing rolled in yummy coconut. It's totally unique to Australia, actually named after Lord Lamington, Governor of Queensland back in the year 1896. That is why it's chosen every year for the national eating competition. But according to the BBC, when the woman stuffed too many of these traditional sponge cakes into her mouth, she had a seizure. Security staff at the hotel rushed to perform CPR and held the woman until paramedics arrived. But unfortunately, by the time they got her to the Hervey Bay Hospital, there was nothing doctors could do and she died. Nobody knows why the cakes threw her into a fit of seizures, but it was likely the seizures that did her in. The last thing anyone needs during an eating contest is to be spasming with 10 tiny cakes in their mouth. Talk about the worst birthday ever. 6. Death by cake. A doctor in training signed up for an eating contest at a Moscow bar. Alexandra Yudina, just 23 years old, was pitted against two other people in the competition. Sadly for this young girl, who wanted to be a doctor, she choked to death after eating only 3 pieces of cake. The contest had barely even started. She popped 3 chunks of cake into her face, but then couldn't swallow them. Spectators at the bar captured her slow and excruciating death on video. The poor student gasped for breath, hammered herself in the chest, and then collapsed to the floor. I'm not sure what it is about cake, but it seems to be the deadliest thing that a person can eat too quickly. Even after just 3 small cakes, Alexandra was done for. Her friends tried to clear the blockage, but to no avail. And these were medical students, people who really knew what they were doing. And when paramedics arrived, they too were unable to clear the blockage. And so, sadly, Alexandra died right there in the bar. After hearing about these terrifying deaths, would you ever sign up for a cake eating competition? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 5. Too many chili peppers. The Carolina Reaper is the hottest chili pepper in the world. Naturally, it's the final challenge in any serious chili pepper eating competition. This spicy pepper goes beyond 2.2 million on the Scoville heat scale. When a 34-year-old man was challenged to eat a Carolina Reaper as part of the contest, he had no idea that it was basically lava. Just listen to what happened to this poor sucker. Immediately after ingesting the pepper, he started dry heaving. He then developed an excruciating pain in his neck that turned into a relentless series of headaches and migraines. The pain was so bad that the man rushed himself to the emergency room at the Bassett Medical Center in New York. He had nausea, vomiting, and couldn't stop dry heaving. The headaches were coming and going, and doctors were worried that he might be suffering from bleeding from his brain. They had to do CT and MRI scans of his brain to see what was happening. This was when they realized that the blood vessels in his brain had narrowed, causing what is known as reversible cerebral vasoconstriction syndrome. In other words, the Carolina Reaper was so hot that it was like a fist squeezing the blood vessels inside this man's brain. He's lucky he didn't drop dead. What's the hottest pepper you've ever eaten? Let us know in the comments below. 4. The deadly chicken wing. Depending on your personal taste, a KFC eating contest is either the grossest thing in the world or like a brief trip to heaven. In Jakarta, Indonesia, a KFC eating contest ended up being one man's final stop in life, as he choked to death on a chicken wing. His name was Freddie Jayati, and he was competing to eat the most chicken wings in under 5 minutes. If he won the contest, he would win about $5,000. But as Freddie finished eating his third piece of chicken, everything went horribly wrong. He got a chunk of it stuck in his throat and couldn't get it out. He tried guzzling water, but that didn't help. He ended up quitting the competition so that he could be taken to the nearby hospital. But even once he got to the hospital, there was nothing doctors could do to save him. In response to the sad death, the contest was called off. There were actually several different KFC contests going on throughout Java and Bali, with a grand finale planned that would host all of the winners of the various contests. But as it turned out, KFC is simply too deadly to be messing around with, even for a huge grand prize. 3. Too many hot dogs. In South Dakota, Walter Eagletail, 47 years old, died from an overload of hot dogs. The eating contest was taking place on the 4th of July. It was a day of celebration and drunken revelry, as well as overindulgence of everyone's favorite wiener-shaped food. According to the Custer County Sheriff Rick Wheeler, the victim was in the middle of the contest when he got a hot dog lodged in his throat and couldn't get it out. This is like choking on cake, except worse, because there was a full hot dog jammed in his throat. It was impossible to remove, and he ended up suffocating to death right there in front of a crowd of spectators, while the other competitors desperately tried to save him. But sadly for Walter, there was nothing anyone could do to save his life. He died with a wiener in his mouth. No pun intended. After Walter's tragic death, the Custer Chamber of Commerce, which was responsible for setting up the contest, canceled the next eating competition that was scheduled for the upcoming Friday. There was supposed to be a pie eating contest, but out of respect for the dead, they put that one on hold. And in case you're curious, the record for the most hot dogs eaten in 10 minutes goes to 8-time champion Joey Chestnut, who managed to swallow 69 hot dogs in a competition back in 2013. 2. The traditional croissant. Mario Melo was a light heavyweight champion boxer in South America back in the 1980s and 1990s. He was an absolute powerhouse, seemingly unbeatable with his fist. But unfortunately for Mario, the one fight he was never able to win was with a croissant. Mario, at 56 years old, agreed to enter a croissant eating contest on live TV in Argentina. There didn't appear to be any danger involved, but as we've come to learn today, eating just about anything can prove deadly. When Mario began stuffing croissants into his mouth, he effectively sealed his fate. He started to choke, and as he choked, the people in the audience and the people at home thought he was pulling a joke for the TV. For this reason, nobody got up to help him. It wasn't until he made a huge scene, pounding on the table and falling over, that people realized he was in real trouble. There was a doctor in the audience, and he ran to try and save Mario's life, but there was nothing that could be done, and the boxer died, defeated finally by a traditional Argentine croissant. 1. A messy contest. 2 guys agreed to an eating competition. It was a face-off between one guy named Cody and another guy named Kobe as part of the Dude Perfect eating competition. They were supposed to eat a 7-pound, 3-kilogram burger packed with more than 7,000 calories at Kenny's Burger Joint. The owner of the burger joint, Kenny Bowers, told the pair that they had just 1 hour to finish the burger and there was only one rule: nobody was allowed to puke. If somebody barfed, the competition was over and they were forfeit. But that didn't stop things from getting exceptionally messy. Nobody choked and died, thankfully. But Kobe did lose control of his bowels in the middle of the eating competition. He pooped right in his pants. And if that weren't disgusting enough on its own, the smell of Kobe pooping his pants caused Cody to barf up his food. Within just seconds, what should have been a hilarious eating contest turned into a fluid free-for-all. The entire restaurant filled with such stink that the competition had to be called to a close, and most people quickly evacuated the restaurant. It was absolutely horrifying. In this case, nobody really won the competition. Everyone was way too disgusted.
If you had to choose, would you rather eat from a fast food restaurant after seeing a cockroach run across the counter, or after seeing an employee exit the bathroom and prepare your food with their bare hands? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.